It's easy to get text into InDesign. Just click in any text frame with a type tool and start typing. But how do you format that text? How do you make it pretty? Let's take a tour through your options for text formatting. First, focus on character styling. That is what you can apply to a single character. If you're looking around InDesign, the first thing you're going to notice about character formatting is that there's a character panel with lots of formatting in here. To be honest, I never use this panel. In fact, I'm just going to close it. Why? Because I use the control panel. Whenever you have text selected in a text frame, for example, I'll double-click on this text frame to get the type tool, and then I'll select the text in it, the control panel automatically shows me all the text formatting. So I just don't need that panel at all. I'll go ahead and close that and put it away, don't have to think about it anymore. Now the control panel has two modes, the character formatting mode and the paragraph formatting mode. I'll be covering the paragraph mode in the next chapter, but in this chapter I'm focusing on the character mode, so I'm going to click on that little button with an A on it. Let's start with the basics. How do we change a font? We can change a font in the first field of the character panel here by simply selecting the pop-up menu and then choosing any font we want. You may not have all these fonts, but this is what's on my system. Next is the font styling. That is, what style within the font family do you want? This is all the different styles in my version of Myriad Pro. It's important to note that in InDesign, there's no way to apply a style that doesn't really exist. For example, in old programs like Quark Express, you could apply a zapfding that's italic, and it would look italic on screen, but that font doesn't actually exist. Can't do that in InDesign. You can only apply fonts that actually exist. So that's very helpful. Note that you can also change font under the type menu. The type menu has a font pop-out menu here, little sub-menu with all the fonts and sizes and so on. But again, I just don't bother with that very often because it's much easier to use the control panel for me. Little shortcut, if you press Command 6 or Control 6 on Windows, it always jumps to the first field of the control panel. So I'll press Command 6, it jumps right to the font field, and now I could use the pop-up menu, but since my hands are on the keyboard already, I just want to change to some other font, let's say maybe Garamond. So I just type G and it jumps right to Garamond. Now I can move through the list of fonts using the arrow key as well. So if I want to go to the next font, I just hit the down arrow key and it jumps to the next font on the list. Same thing with the styles. Hit Tab to jump to the styles, and then I can press the arrow key to jump to the next style, and the next style, and the next style, and so on. When I'm done, I press Enter, and the focus goes back to the text here. Now remember, with character formatting, the formatting will only be applied to any characters that are selected with the type tool. So if I want to change the size of just a few letters here, I can select those letters, come up to the size menu, and change it to anything I want. Let's say I'll make this a little bit bigger. But there's a caveat, a corollary to this have to select the text with the text frame feature. A little tip that a lot of people don't realize. If you want to apply the same formatting to all the text in text frame, and that text frame isn't linked to other frames, I'll use the selection tool to select this entire frame, and now I'm going to apply the same formatting throughout the entire story, all the text in that frame. In this case, I'm going to change the leading. Something you need to know about InDesign is that leading is a character format, not a paragraph format. If you've been used to Quark Express, you're thinking of leading as a paragraph format, but in InDesign, it's a character format. You can change the leading of a single character or a single line of text at a time. So that turns to be interesting, but also a little frustrating. But I want the same leading through the entire story. So I'm going to go to the leading field. Oh, it's not showed up. Why is it not showed up? Because the selection tool is selected in the tool panel, so I don't see any of the regular type formatting. No problem. I simply click on the type tool, and as soon as I have the type tool selected, I don't actually have to select any of the text. All of my formatting shows up here. Now you'll see that some of these fields are blank here. For example, the font style. That's because there's two different styles within the story. Similarly, there's two different leading values throughout this whole story. That's okay. I can click in here and say I want one leading value, in this case 19 points, and apply it to the entire text in that frame. Let me show you something else about leading and why it can be frustrating. I'll click over here and I'll zoom in to 200% with Command 2 or Control 2 on Windows, and I want to change the leading of this paragraph. So I click in the text, I go up to my leading value, and I change it to 18 points. And nothing happens. Why? Because remember, leading is a character format. So, alright, I'll select a word here and I'll change that to 18 points. and it looks really terrible. Why? Because leading is a character format, like I've said. And the way leading works is whatever has the biggest amount of leading on a line wins. So in this case, this word has 18-point leading, and this stuff over here has 14-point leading, so the whole line gets 18-point leading because of that one word. I find that very frustrating. This just constantly drives me crazy. Maybe it's because I'm used to using Quark Express, but when I change leading, I typically want it to change the entire paragraph. Fortunately, there's a preference I can change, and you can change if you want it to work like this as well. So I'll go to the Preferences dialog box, and on the Mac, it's under the InDesign menu. On Windows, it's under the Edit menu, and I'll choose General. So I'll click on Type on the list over here on the left, and then I will turn on one of my favorite features, Apply Leading to Entire Paragraph. There we go. Now when I change my leading, it's going to apply to the entire paragraph. It doesn't change any paragraphs that already have leading applied to them, but as soon as I change the leading now, for example, the cursor's just flashing in that paragraph, and I'll change the leading to, let's say, 24 points. It automatically applies it to the entire paragraph, just the way I want. Let's set it down to 14 again. You see how that works? I like having that preference turned on, so that's one of the first things I do when I'm creating a new template, or when no documents are open, I'll turn that preference on, and then that preference will be applied to every document I create from now on. Okay, what about kerning and tracking? Kerning and tracking have to do with the letter spacing, how much space there is between each letter. For example, if I want to have less space between this W and an E, I'll use kerning. And kerning is found also up in the control panel here, in this field, the kerning field. And I can choose from the pop-up menu here, let's say minus 75, and you can see that the W and the E are now closer together. It's removed some of the letter spacing. That's a little bit too much, so I'll change it to maybe something like maybe minus 25. That looks better to me. You have a lot of control over your kerning here. In fact, if I select this entire word, I want to show you something else here. Right now it's grayed out because there's multiple kerning values applied throughout that text, of course. And now look at this. In the pop-up menu, there's two options, metrics and optical. Metrics means just use the kerning pairs that are built into the font, whatever the font designer created. Optical is something interesting. Optical means use a built-in algorithm. InDesign has this built-in algorithm that can look at the character shapes and figure out what the optimal optical kerning is between every character. It's very cool. I really like using the optical kerning for a lot of my text. But you can always go in and override it if you want to. Look at this. If I click here, see how it says minus 7 in parentheses? That means that the optical kerning has decided that there should be minus 7 units between these two characters. And these units, by the way, are 1/1000th of an M. And since this is 60-point type, an M is 60 points wide, 1/1000th of that is whatever 1/1000th of 60 points is. And this is 7/1000ths of an M between those two characters. So you can always see what's going on, and you can always override that. I'll just use my arrow keys here to adjust it up and down by 10-unit increments. Now what if I want to change the letter spacing throughout the entire word here? Let's scroll over here so we can see the whole word. If I want to change it to the entire word, I'm going to select this entire word and then change the tracking. And tracking means letter spacing across a range of characters. Some people actually call this range kerning. So you can do that with this field here. This is the tracking value. And I can choose a tracking value, and this is going to put the same amount of space between every character in the selection. Let's go ahead and bump it up significantly. Now we have 5 units in this word. Of course, this is just the beginning when it comes to formatting text. In the next movie, we'll dive deeper and explore more advanced character styling. In the last movie, we looked at the basics of character formatting. Now let's look at a few more important styling options you have. Let's start with horizontal scaling. Remember, you can always see the type formatting by simply selecting the Type tool in the Tool panel. Now I'll select this text, and I'll zoom in to 200% by pressing Command 2 or Control 2 on Windows. And I'm going to look at some other formatting over here on this side of the control panel. First, let's talk about scaling. You have two options. There's vertical scaling and horizontal scaling. I can change my vertical scaling by choosing from a pop-up menu or typing in whatever value I want. Let's do a vertical scaling of 150%. And I can change my horizontal scaling by, again, whatever value I want. That looks pretty ugly, actually, but I'm not saying you have to use these features. I'm just saying these features do exist, and you can use them if you need to. Let's set these back to 100%, so it looks a little bit more normal. Now, what about baseline shift? Baseline shift is the ability to move one or more characters up or down from its normal baseline. You can find baseline shift in the control panel right here. That little A icon that's moving up. I'm going to use my arrow keys on the keyboard to move these in 1-point increments, but you can see as each time I click the keyboard, it moves another point up, or I press the down arrow and it moves down. So you have very precise control here. If you want, you could type in exact values like 5.75 points up, and it fits right there. You may have noticed that the text suddenly changed, the effect, that bevel effect, kind of disappears. That happens sometimes. All you have to do is click someplace and it usually comes right back. Just a redraw problem. The next item in the control panel is skew. I'll reselect that O, and I can change the skew of that, sort of shearing it over to one side or the other. You can use the arrow keys here, but it only does it in 1 degree increments, and that's usually too small for me to see easily, so I'm going to use the Shift arrow key, and Shift, remember that the Shift key will move in larger increments when you're in one of these numeric fields. So Shift up arrow will move in bigger increments. And you can see that positive numbers shear to the right and negative numbers shear to the left. It's as simple as that. It's not often that you're going to want to use a shear or skew value on text, but it can come in handy for special effects, although I have used this skew effect on some fonts that don't have an italic. If I need an italic, I'll select the text and kind of skew it over just a little bit, maybe 10 degrees, and I get kind of a fake italic effect. And, you know, type purists are probably wincing right now, but it has come in handy for me. Now let's look at underscores and strike-throughs. I'm going to zoom back with the Command 0 or Control 0 on Windows, and that puts me in fit in window mode. Now I'll come down here to this text down here, and I'll zoom in again to 200%, Command 2 or Control 2 on Windows. What if I want to underline some of these words? I'll just select some random words here, and I want to underline it. You'll notice in the control panel there's an underline button. If I click on that, I get an underline. There it is. It's as simple as that. But the problem is that underline usually looks a little bit clunky. It's just kind of like a 1-point line underneath there. It would be nice to go in there and tweak it a little bit to make it more attractive. Well, we can do that. Let's go ahead and select the words again. I double-clicked on the first word and just dragged over here. Double-clicking, remember, selects a single word. And then dragging will select multiple words. Now, to get my custom underline, I could go to the Control Panel flyout menu and choose Underline Options. But there's a much easier way. I try and avoid these flyout menus when I can. So instead, I'm simply going to option-click on the underscore icon. It brings up the Custom Underline Options dialog box. So on Windows, of course, that's the Alt-click on it to open the dialog box, or Option-click on the Mac. I'll move this out of the way so I can see what I'm doing. And now you can see that underline is turned on, but you have lots and lots of control over your custom underline. We can make it thinner. We could do like a really nice hairline, thin line. We can change the offset. Maybe I'll move it a little bit farther away from the line. You can type your own values in here as well as if you want to. You could change the color of it. Let's say I'll make it green. Why not? And all sorts of things. In fact, you can even change the type of the line to any of the normal standard lines. For example, a double line or a wavy line or dotted line or whatever. I'm going to leave it set to solid though. Now, why can't I see the effect going on here? Because the preview checkbox isn't turned on. I have to turn that checkbox on in order to actually see the effect down here. Of course, it's also reversed because I have it highlighted. So I'll click OK, click off the text, and now you can see a very fine, thin hairline. You have total control over these underlines. Let's also look at strike-throughs. You can do the same thing with strike-throughs. Let's grab some text and hit strike-through, and it puts a line through it. If I want to edit the line, Option-click on it or Alt-click on Windows brings the dialog box, and now I have the same sorts of controls here. I could make a really thick strike-through. I could change its color. I could make it wavy. You have all kinds of controls here. Click OK, and then you'll see that I have the effect I'm looking for. Okay, quick. One more advanced character styling option that I need to point out, and that's the no break character. Sometimes you have words that break across a line, but you don't want them to. You want them to always stay together. Well, there are various ways to accomplish this, but the easiest way is to assign the no break character style. I'll go up to the control panel flyout menu way over here, and I'll choose no break. No break simply means this word should not break. Whatever happens, don't break it. And you can see that it popped down to the second line. No break is extremely useful when you're trying to fine-tune a layout and make sure that words break or don't break when you want them to. That's a lot of different formatting options, and we've only scratched the surface of the character level formatting. In the next movie, we'll look at some of the features for turning text into uppercase or small caps characters.